Welcome to the Obojima Podcast. My name is Jeremiah, and this is Ari and Adam. We are the writers of Obojima, campaign setting for 5e, and this week you'll be joining us as we talk about creating villains, just in general, but specifically villains that feel right for Obojima. That being said, you can use it for any campaign setting. I think this podcast is going to be perfect for just deconstructing villains as itself. And specifically, we talk about this in Obojima. It's a chapter about creating villains, antagonists. And Ari, I believe, has written most of this, not to throw him on the spot. But I think we'll just jump into what makes a compelling villain and how we imagine villains in Obojima. And so, yeah, with that, there's, I think the biggest thing is to talk about villains in Obojima and their general desires, because I don't think it's a standard like D&D desire.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like the Lich trying to take over the world type situation.
I mean, we had a chat early on, was like, you know, is there evil?
Right.
Like pure kind of Strad level evil that's irredeemable. Like there's no, it's like you look into that person's eyes and you just see the void of you know, complete darkness in there. Like, does that exist on Obojima? And I think we all kind of said no, not really. Like this place is too whimsical, too like if there's always a reason why somebody is the way somebody is the way they are. I think we're using like Mononoke as kind of sort of our benchmark. Like, people could be doing things that seem wrong to one group, but from their point of view, it makes sense. Like they're like, most of the, you know, quote unquote things that might be evil here are really just forces of nature, or it's like an animal that is aggressive.
Right.
Or it's a person that's just trying to survive, or they're doing something out of their own sense of what they think is good. Yeah. Like, it's well intentioned, but it's you know, it's perceived as evil through somebody else's eyes. But there isn't like,
I mean, sure, I think there's also, you know, self-serving motivations are also in palette for Obojima. Like, I could have somebody who is motivated by greed or jealousy, but that's not evil.
No,
right? That's not like cosmically evil. That is a jerk being a jerk.
Yeah, it's morally not the best.
Yeah,
but it's not evil.
And so, like, this is one of the things. Like, when we were considering this, you know, we were thinking about them as antagonists more than villains, right? That they stand at, they are at odds with the hero, or rather, the hero might be at odds with the villain and what the villain is up to. But it's not necessarily because I go out to fight evil.
And I think also because we don't have gods, you know, there are no gods in Obojima. Like, there are powerful spirits that, you know, people might revere and whatever, but, you know, gods are usually sort of the source. Like, an evil god, you know, is like sort of the placeholder. Like, they're holding this space of evil, and then characters will tap into that, like NPCs or cultists will tap into that evil, and maybe one cultist will touch so close to the god that they become an embodiment or an avatar of that, and then they, you know, the eyes roll back on their head and they're like, ooh, you know, and they become as close to evil as a person with a soul can.
So we do have demons.
We do have demons.
So demons, you know, are spirits who were then given the boot from the spirit realm, and changed in kind. So there is something that is. So there is a wickedness to demons, but there's not. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting concept about now. Now we're digging into it, but it means, at least in the spirit realm, there is a concept of right conduct, and spirits that drift from that can be transformed into a demon, that there's a corrupting element to their behaviors. But we don't have, so you can fight a demon, and that itself would be, I mean, I guess you are dealing with something that is, it's not inherently evil in that it was their actions that then transformed into or that manifested in a physical way.
Yeah.
But it does mean that there is some level of judgment on those behaviors, if that makes sense. Like there is something that is, certain acts do come with some transformative elements. But
right.
Like if we think of demons in Dungeons and Dragons, like they are agents of chaos that ultimately destroy things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not necessarily planning it out or scheming it or like with malice of forethought, which is like kind of like the ultimate evil. Like if you were in a court of law and you did this with malice of forethought, which means I'm thinking about it and I'm like, this is exactly how I'm going to perpetrate this evil act. Demons are just in the moment. They're like, I'm going to flip this table and then I'm going to like light that on fire. Woo, that's awesome. Like they're just chaos agents, which is less evil than something that is coldly calculating the evil that's doing. These demons in Obojima are probably more on that side, the chaotic evil side, than a lawful evil, which is more of the cold calculating, diabolical, nine hells kind of evil that, to use the Dungeons and Dragons sort of
the devil demon paradigm.
Yeah. But I don't think that Obojima demons are as nasty as, say, Demogorgon or, like any of the Dungeons and Dragons demons. I don't think they're that bad. I think they're more mischievous spirits that wreck stuff. They're more like poltergeists, maybe. And maybe they are worse. I don't know. What do you guys...
I kind of imagined the transformation from spirit to demon, and how a demon acts after its transformation to be more in line with the things it did wrong as a spirit. So like, for example, if, a spirit was... being twisted and haunting, physical beings and messing with them and doing something corrupt and doing something that like morally was wrong. And they started to slowly transform and then not by their own fruition, but just through the nature of this transformation and magic, the things that they were doing wrong became even more wrong, almost heightened by their transformation. And so what was like a spirit that like messed with people and scared them and became a little more nefarious, and maybe they accidentally killed someone on accident, and then it kind of starts their transformation, eventually switches to an Uragama who now haunts and chases people and likes the fear in their eyes and that kind of stuff. And that is bad. And that is, is a form of evil. But I think even that is like almost like a tortured soul. Like demons you can almost see demons as like thrust into the situation through the magic of transformation. Not to saying that that's exactly how it goes, but I would almost say that even an Uragama who likes to messes with people and is terrifying and everyone hates them, there could be a redemption arc for that character. Yeah. I could see a version where an Uragama is helped or taken care of or maybe cured or something to that effect.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of the conversations we had when we were doing Curse of Strad was like is Strad redeemable? Like in the adventure, we were like, hey, like if you decided like, all right, we're going to try to show Strad the arrow, because, there's this whole story about how he killed his brother and all that, to steal his brother's wife. Like there was this thing of like, well, maybe if you got to talking to Strad, and because he's highly intelligent, like you could kind of show him the error of his ways and say, maybe if you do these things, these acts of, contrition, like you could redeem yourself, or free the people from Barovia and like, you know, give them back the joy of their lives and kind of open up the domain of dread and like and we decided that like, nope, you can't ever do that.
Yeah.
Like it's just, he's irredeemable. That door is closed. Even a wish spell isn't going to do it. He's done.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa. Because when we got to that point, we're like, that's evil.
Yeah.
Like this is the ultimate epitome of it. There's no way that you're ever going to get through to this thing. So
but then you got to Zerial when you were working.
I was
on
just thinking of Zerial.
Yeah. And that was the thing of like, oh yeah. So Zerial is not all evil.
Yeah.
That's Darth Vader. You know, there's this little bit. There's this little shred in there. And that's the difference. So you're not evil until you're irredeemable.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of saying it.
So like in terms of Obojima, when you're thinking about an antagonist, whether or not they are truly villainous like Strad, or even, the fallen from grace concept like Azariel, or just at odds with the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's a whole range of ways to think about it. So like some of the questions that we put down here, like when you're considering this antagonist, especially if there are different levels, right? If you're talking about an adventure kind of antagonist or like a campaign level one. So a lot of these are about the book talks about is going to be the campaign level antagonist.
Yeah.
So this is this through line character or entity that is going to probably, touch what the characters are up to at least several times during the course of a campaign. And so like one of the big questions you're going to want to ask is like, what drives the hero to thwart the antagonist?
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? Is it because of an oath you took? Is it because of something personal that happened to you because of the antagonist? So like those are the questions that eventually, no matter what the initial thing that motivates them, it should probably become personal.
Yeah.
Right. At some point. And that's what makes it memorable. And again, like one of the joys of a fun antagonist is that they will likely be among the most memorable NPCs in your entire campaign if done correctly. Like that's what you want, because you want the ultimate victory or not to be memorable. You want the climax of that campaign to be something that feels like a good payoff, whether the character succeed or not ultimately. And that means also to make them memorable, it's like, what is the thing that makes that antagonist unique, right? So you need something that's going to allow the players, not the characters, but the players at the table to conjure the image of this thing at the table. So we have, you want to consider what makes them unique. And then ultimately, if like the antagonist is a character, do they deserve empathy? Right? Not all of them do.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes, antagonists so interesting, is adding a touch of humanity to them. In fact, that makes it, it makes a bittersweet situation. There's a thing I was talking about the other day about Legend of Zelda and Ganondorf. And someone was saying Ganondorf, is like a demon prince and he's incredibly evil and all of this other stuff and he's irredeemable. And I went and thought about it and I was like, is he irredeemable because we haven't seen his story? Is that the only reason he's irredeemable? Because I was a huge Legend of Zelda fan, obviously. I was thinking about Ocarina of Time or also I guess in the new Legend of Zelda, he has very similar story arc. The first man born to the Gerudo in however many years, like a society of women, he's kind of destined as this prince, this king, and he's the person with the third part of the Triforce, right? The power, the Triforce of power. Link having courage, Zelda having wisdom. He's grown up from a very young age being told he's to rule and like this thing, and so like it's almost like a monster of society's creation, like being born into power, being born with, being told the power of wisdom, like being fed into this idea that you are perfect and that you are this something that's been born once every 100 or 1,000 years or something crazy like that. Like,
yep,
it is a society built around your destiny, and that goes to your head. He's a messiah. He's a messiah figure in this world.
Hellboy is a similar concept, and yet he's a figure whose sense of free will wins out. Like, that's his whole arc.
Yeah.
He is destined to be this anti-messiah, essentially, right? The bringer of the destruction of the world. And yet, as a hero, because it's a hero's arc and not a villain's arc, he's constantly having to deal with that and turns away from it.
And he's tempered by friendship, by humans, by being brought in as a little kind of baby demon or devil. Like, he's brought in and shown love and shown this other way of being. And it's kind of, from a devil's point of view, his devilness has been corrupted by, human empathy and human kindness.
And Catholicism.
Yes. And a sweet dose of Jesus. And that is tempered him. And he, when he comes to that moment, there's little bit of goodness in it.
It was the pancakes.
It was the pancakes that did it.
That's right. And the cigars.
Yeah, I think, I am one who believes that the monstrous NPC who is there to, to battle and just like, you're there just to fight. Yeah. That is awesome. And I think that that's part of, a patchwork of antagonists, right? Like, that has its place. But I think an antagonist that you consider, I think when I'm looking back at the writing from before, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. But it's like the idea that an antagonist that demands empathy despite their actions, what it forces the players to do, or the characters rather, is to learn about them and not just react to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating. This came, I think, from early conversations that we had, looking at, some of the Miyazaki films. Yeah. And looking at some of the antagonists in those movies, and they're not one-dimensional in terms of just like, I'm bad or I'm doing bad things because I am bad. Yeah. Right? They're oftentimes motivated out of fear. If you look at Nausicaa, right? The people who are operating there are dealing with a war, and almost like it's an arms race, right? They're trying to get one up on the other group.
They're trying to find one of the dead giant, as all arms races end, trying to find an apocalyptic giant that'll end the world.
Yeah. And so, like, that's one thing. That is something that I can understand. If I learn about what they're doing, I can still be 100% opposed. Empathizing and knowing why somebody's doing what they're doing does not mean I am okay with what they're doing. It doesn't mean that I have to come around.
Right? Especially later in the movie, when Nausicaa meets that group of people that are like a third party faction, like another. I think they're the ones that are taking the bug, the little bug, and like have it on a little flying machine or flying it towards the Valley of the Wind.
Oh yeah. Is that the Tolmekians?
Yeah. And they're doing it, and that's villainous, and Nausicaa has to stop that. But at the exact same time, their land was just demolished, destroyed, bombarded, and gone. And so their action makes sense, and you almost agree with them. Like, it's not the right thing, but it's understandable.
It's like one of the things, like, when I'm like kind of coming up with a villain is like, what is the manifestation of their fear, right? Because every villain is basically afraid of something, like, and that could be like a present moment fear, like, they're paranoid and they've got to defend themselves against perceived aggressors. And so they create their fortress and they've got all these things. Or it could be a fear that happened to them when they were really young. Like, and it kind of goes back to that thing you said earlier, where it's like, you've got a villain and they're horrible, but they have a relatable story. Yeah. Like you learn about, like you were saying, like you learn about their story, and in that you can feel a sense of understanding for them. So like in the case of Strad had a very relatable story. You understood why he became evil. But the trick is that if you related to him and you were like, oh, poor guy, he just wants to be loved. And then you approach him with that, he will use that against you because he is just zero soul in there. And so you're kind of walking into a spider's web.
Yeah.
Which is a fun thing. Like if the DM can play Strad to be like, try to appear, but you always want to give players a chance to roll and say like, is there any like soul going on in that guy's eyes? Like, nope, just dead. It's dead evil.
Yeah.
You can feel that to the core and it actually sends chills down your spine. That's one way. But what is the manifestation of their fear? And in the case, they might go find that sort of, dead mutant thing that shoots a nuclear bomb out like in Nausicaa. Like that was the manifest. They were so afraid of the Ohm and so afraid of nature attacking them and destroying their way of life that they're like, we're willing to build this, resurrect this giant freak to like save us, because that's how scared we are. So it's like, what is the fear level? And to the degree that people are afraid or a mob is afraid is the degree that they do something completely bonkers that is like way outside of a moral, like their moral compass just falls apart at some point and they're like, we'll blow everything up, and it's like, we don't care because we're that afraid. We've like lost our capacity to think rationally. So
afraid or angry.
Yep.
Or sad, like sorrowful,
Yeah.
taking action due to a really intense negative emotion.
Yeah.
I think with all of this, to kind of encompass what we were even saying with this episode, is what makes a Obojima villain an Obojima villain. And I think it's humanity. I think it's having a smidge of, even the most horrific villain in Obojima, there's something redeemable about them. There's something in there that you can play with, you can pull on and unravel them and kind of bring them back. I think that's what makes them interesting.
It also means that victory over them isn't one-dimensional. It's not just, reduce them to 0 hit points and you did it.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe that is the answer.
Yeah.
Maybe at your table, that's how you won, right? You defeated them, you found no other choice. And so you went and fought them and you won. But it might mean that, you defeat them. I'll use Avatar again, like the way that they defeat the Fire Lord, or I guess he's the Phoenix King at the end, Ozai.
Yeah.
The way he's defeated, right?
In Avatar.
Yeah, in Avatar.
Like,
Sorry, it's always
to
Avatar.
mention it every single episode.
I'll stop.
No, it's impossible.
Never
it's so
stop.
good.
But it got me thinking about antagonists, and like you have your levels of antagonists there between Zuko, Azula, and Ozai, right? And there's more in there. But those three could be. You could spend a whole episode just looking at that.
Yeah. You feel bad for Azula at the end.
It's weird.
I don't.
Is she redeemable though? Like,
is she redeemable?
Is she redeemable?
Well, not to be a big nerd, but she does have a redemption arc afterwards in the comic series.
I haven't read them.
In the comic series, Zuko needs her to go find his mother, and during that, you kind of go like, "Oh man, this little girl wasn't loved by her mom," and you just kind of feel terrible for her.
That's right.
And so she starts to play into that. She goes, "If I'm seen as a monster, I should be a monster." And then you're like, "Oh, this is brutal."
And that behavior was rewarded by the father.
The father.
So like, okay, and she's gonna get love from a parent one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting, right? So you can
cool.
play with things like that, and these aren't things you even ever have to show. These are things that will inform your decisions as a DM on the actions they're making, or it's find outable, right? It's discoverable.
So that's actually, I think that's something that all these shows do a good job of is having interaction with your villain and your players in non-combat ways that aren't just like them fighting back and forth, but conversations, understanding them and seeing their actions, but maybe not being able to participate in them. That kind of like, I'm on the other side of the cliff face watching them do something with no ability to act, but I get to get a glimpse of life. I get to see a movie clip to watch and take in and then react to later, or understanding information or meeting an NPC. How interesting is it, if you went and if you saw the villain and you followed him and he went to a small house and there was an old woman there, and then you're like, oh, this is his mom. And like he's kind to her and he does all that, and you're like, I'm not gonna attack him while he's with his mom, and I could now use the mom as leverage, but where am I? That's really humanizing. There's also and showing that's important, I think.
And you can do it through villagers. I'm thinking of the cartels, and
I went to Dr. Doom in Latveria because they love him in Latveria.
That's true.
Yeah, but this idea that a kid grows up in a poor town and decides he becomes a cartel lord, and then when he makes billions of dollars, he goes back to his poor town that's still poor. The government isn't doing anything for him, and he pays everybody. And he brings in businesses and he makes sure that everybody's taken care of. And they're like, you're a hero.
Yeah.
But that guy murders people is doing all these things. But in that person's hometown, they're a hero and they're doing good. Yeah. So there's this weird sort of thing. So, an Obojima villain could be something where you go to a village and you hear about this great person. And they're doing all this wonderful, and before they came, we were wiped out. There's the village of Polwater that is a disaster. There might be another place like that on the East Coast that we haven't talked about.
No.
That's not in the book, but it could be that it's on the rise because of this wonderful person that's doing this wonderful thing. But they're saving that part, but they're doing evil somewhere else.
Yeah,
that could be really interesting.
You go into a town and they have a festival and you participate in the festival, and at the end you're like, well, happy villain's name day, and you're like, what? Oh no. But no, I think that's really interesting and makes for compelling characters. But I think the other thing that I wanted to jump onto too is to talk about what we see often in films from Miyazaki, and that and also Avatar, a ton of films, is that dual antagonist story arc. The early level villain becoming an ally at a later time, or perhaps an early level villain who is the lesser of two evils. And you see that a lot. You see that in what's the one, Castle in the Sky, with the pirates and the military, the pirates being the combatants for the first third of the film.
Even Porco Rosso,
with the American pilot turning into an ally at the end.
And then you just have basically this looming kind of threat of just the rise of fascism.
Which is is very heavy.
But that's the thing. It's usually there's something bigger going on, and so it recontextualizes those earlier villains. Your encounters with those earlier antagonists change form, right? And that's not always the case, but it's a rewarding thing to do because it means that this NPC and the characters have history together. And that's just wonderful. It's a way to show progress in time. It's a way to show that these characters have developed. And those characters, you think about the Witch of the Waste, that's the Howl's Moving Castle. She's not the big bad, even though she's the impetus, for the whole movie, for the character arc. But there's a war going on. This is a common theme in these movies, but. That's the thing. Or even Boy and the Heron, the Heron starts off as this antagonistic figure.
Ally. Princess Mononoke. Now Princess Mononoke is different because antagonists with the leader of Irontown.
Lady Eboshi.
They are not friends at the end. But it's very clear at the end that Lady Eboshi is not, and in my opinion, is not the villain, the main villain. The main villain being, of course, the lords of the land who are killing the spirit
and manipulating all the different groups.
And then who's the monk?
The monk is so good.
Like, he's kind of a jerk.
He is. Yeah.
You know,
he's a mercenary.
And he's also, you know, the one who like sort of doesn't care if the big nature spirit gets wiped out. Like, he's
super pragmatic.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, right? So you're looking at that antagonist. And again, like, Princess Mononoke is a great example of having more than just one of these that is nuanced, right? The big bad in Princess Mononoke is off camera.
Yeah.
Right? It's the circumstances that they have created, and then all of these characters have prioritized different things in the context of that movie. And so Lady Eboshi has taken in lepers, has given, you know, all of these women in a very patriarchal society a sense of independence and control over their own destiny, and is able to hold off against a samurai army, right?
Yeah.
And so at the expense is cutting down the forest to make guns and to make iron. And so, okay, to the forest spirit, Lady Eboshi is the worst.
Yeah.
You know? And so all of these things can be all true at the same time.
Yeah.
And you know, that's fantastic. Like, that if you can pull that off, that level of nuance, great. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes an RPG needs very, very clear.
Yeah.
This is what you have to do. This is the antagonist. Go get them. But then when you get them, that's usually when the decision is made. You've discovered something about them.
Yeah.
I think in Obojima, you can set that up in that there are ages, and there are also sort of like, there are modern towns, like Yataman is a modern town. Like, and there's also like corruption, which is adding a stressor that is going to make people do things in maybe irrational ways, which is kind of like the root of, like, if there is such a thing as evil, you know, in this world, that's going to be the thing that's going to push people to do more sort of irrational evil acts, and maybe to abandon, like, there's kind of old ways of doing things. Like, when I think of Obojima, I think of, like, there are these traditional ways of doing things, and there's these old spirits that people honor, but as pressure gets put on people, they might be more like ready to like push away the old ways and adopt new stuff, or cut down a forest to get something so that they can fight this threat.
Yeah.
Like, those, I think, are things that a DM could use in this setting to kind of start to set up those kinds of situations where an antagonist arises that isn't all just monochromatically evil. Like, they've got nuance to them.
Yeah. I think with that, I'd wonder, how would we build an antagonist? Because we haven't really done that. I think that's one thing someone asked earlier too, which is, who are the big bads in Obojima that I can use in my game, besides the corruption? And I thought about it, and I was like, there's not really big bads, and that's because as creatives, I kind of came to the conclusion there that
yeah, we have local bads, right?
We have local bads, but we don't really, there's not a overarching villain that's trying to take over the island or do something terrible. And that's just because that's not really what Obojima is about. When you introduce this character, let's say you did in Obojima, this character is the character doing that big bad thing and is the only one doing it, There's not like, if there is, I'm trying to think of a good character. If there's a person starting a war or fighting against a faction, it is the first person to do that, and it's the only person doing that,
Yeah, or like a Howler Chieftain.
Yeah,
exactly. Howler Chieftain could be a big bad in Obojima. Like, they, went and wiped out a village. Like, Obojima is not sort of known for, like, bloodshed and slaughter, but if anything was going to do it, it would be Howlers. They could do that. Or it could be that there's a spirit that has slipped into becoming a demon and, wants to, take over a village in some kind of weird way. Like, it's not necessarily they're possessing people, but they're manipulating people in some way. Or, like, those could kind of be big bads. And then you'd have like maybe an elder spirit that got corrupted. And then that thing is like kind of raging out of the mountain and causing great damage, you know, and you've got to stop that thing. And the idea is that if you kill the elder spirit, then you kind of kill the soul of the mountain or something like that.
Right.
And then all the trees die on the mountain. But if you can find a way to redeem it, then the mountain restores back to life, like calming the spirit down. So I think there's ways to have big bads.
But I always feel like the big bads, at least human-like big bads, would have some sort of, their goal or their desire has to come from some sort of selfish reason, or something, not selfish maybe, but like they have a thing that they're trying.
Well-intentioned.
From
their point of view.
That is exactly, that is in their head. There's a clear reason they should be doing this task. It's it might be selfish. Again, it could be, I'm going to go and rip a bunch of coral out from the bottom of, the shallows because there's a little thing there's a MacGuffin that I need, and it causes the Lion King fish to go crazy. And now, fish folk are raiding the land, and the Lion King fish might be the person you're trying to stop, but the real villain is the person who's causing all this mischief, and they're, after some sort of treasure or whatever it ends up being,
And that's something that if you were going to have a character like that, them just being kind of like an adventure schlemiel where they're just like causing all of these problems all over, the resolution has to be a confrontation with them.
Yeah.
Right. So like one of the things we put in here, and again, this is not comprehensive at all, is a list of like motivations for antagonistic behavior.
Yeah.
Right. And so like there are things on here like they might be a trickster by nature, in which case that's kind of what they're about, just kind of being a butt. But like maybe that's a little bit harder to understand. Mm-hmm. But you might have somebody who they're motivated because they have contempt for or are jealous of someone, right? So this is what's driving them. Again, doesn't excuse the behavior, but you understand where they're coming from. They might be misguided or lack key information. This comes to, I thought I was doing right by doing this, but you missed that this is actually causing all of this, and unless you are stopped, you are going to continue acting accordingly.
Yeah.
And so like these things, these motivations directly kind of dovetail into when you are crafting the conclusion with that antagonist, that final confrontation.
Yeah.
What that ending might look like. And so if, let's say, the characters overcome the antagonist, one of the things we look at is like considering the outcome. Right. Let's say you have that final confrontation, you did the thing, everybody high fives because you won. What does that mean? And so, one of the things what we talked about was this idea of having different types of endings. I think sometimes in RPGs, there's the sense of the conclusion of the campaign is the last fight.
I got him.
Right. But you don't have the kind of the actual resolution to the story. Mm-hmm. That's the final event.
Yeah.
But then what happens? And so, there is, like we talk about, there's a straightforward one. It's just that one. We call it the "we did it" ending, where we beat them, and everything is great.
We all had a feast. Yeah. It's the Death Star. The second Death Star is destroyed, and we're all parting with Ewoks.
Yeah. And then you have your bittersweet one, which is like we call it the "at what cost" ending, right? Are some of the characters changed as a result of it? Is the landscape forever changed? This is like the scouring of the Shire. Right. Like they won, but like it did cost something to get there. The redemption, right? Yep. Is this the, we call it, this is the, I'm a good guy now ending, right? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Or the false redemption where they thought they were redeemed, but like they were always, like, this is my nature. Like, it'd be like redeeming Loki, but Loki is still a trickster and all, like that kind of a thing. There's the anticlimax where this is not really the true end. This is the, we'll meet again ending kind of thing, where you thwart them, but they remain a potential future threat, which is great for long campaigns.
Yeah.
If you do something like this in your first adventure, and this now sets up the campaign villain, right? So you could do things like that.
It's also interesting to have a full campaign where it concludes with this isn't over, and then you go and play a separate campaign where that villain still proceeds, and you're a different group of adventurers now dealing with that villain.
One. But now the players have that meta knowledge.
Which is interesting.
That's cool.
The last one that we have, again, none of this comprehensive. If you find other categories, that's great, and you're going to find those nuances. But like the reversal, this is the bad guy was right ending, where you find out as you're discovering information.
Yeah.
One of those motivations is that the antagonist doesn't have complete information.
Wow.
But that could also be true about you and your group.
It's like the Magneto.
Right. You're thwarting them. It's like, oh, crap.
Oh, wait,
they actually
got a point.
Yeah.
Right. So there's something to that. And sometimes that concept will lead to, intra-group strife of just like, oh, I believe it's a reversal ending, and you believe actually we kicked their teeth in and they deserved it. We did it. And so like it's one of those. So like if you approach these types of resolutions with this in mind, then you can end your campaign or adventure with really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And not, it's not just the end of combat and then we just kind of pack up and go home.
I think with this, we might even mention it, but you have to be careful if you pick this ending.
Oh yeah.
Because it can be, well, interesting. It can be a situation where the I gotcha rug pull makes the players feel
right. These things, as all of this kind of stuff, a big kind of role of the dungeon master is reading the room, and getting a sense of what your characters or what your players want in an experience and what you want. You're also a player as a DM, but obviously, if this feels like it's out of left field and it's like, gotcha, suckers, like that's not rewarding.
Yeah.
So all of these things is how do you make that end both memorable and rewarding? Because yes, it could be memorable and then feel pretty crappy, but that's not what you want, especially if it's a long campaign.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think when you get like table talk around, like, is the bad guy bad or good? Like some people might, I think that's a good, like if you get your players talking on that level, whether some of them are like, hey, I think they're actually right. Magneto's right. Like, and some want to be, mutants should just rule, and then other people are like, wait a minute. Like, with great power comes great responsibility, and then it's like, okay. And then have that discussion among your players and then just sit back and watch that to happen.
Yeah.
That's cool. But I don't know how in Obojima, I think that is like a Lady Eboshi situation.
Exactly. Exactly that. Yeah.
Where some people might even be like, I think we want to join her, like help her out and I think a really cool device to use is you have your antagonist, but then you have the antagonist's people. Some of them are really awesome people, like like the ladies that run the bellows and stuff. They're just such great characters, and they're just trying to like live their best lives.
Yep.
And they're super charismatic and fun and free and independent. And
the lepers are the gunsmiths there, right? Like they're making weapons.
Yeah. They're awesome. Like, and you want to help them.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, how bad can Lady Eboshi? So you could even make Lady Eboshi even badder, but by virtue of the people that she's like leading, it makes her kind of good. Like it's a very conflicty kind of deal.
And that's what's great. Like, Obojima is so fascinating to me just as a place because, it's not, a gory setting and it's not meant to be a brutal setting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's also without meaning.
Yeah.
It's not a fluff setting.
Right.
Yeah.
So like you can have these antagonists, and because it's not so kind of like always kick in the door and, slaughter everyone is there, because it's not that, it kind of forces these conversations. And that's what I find interesting. Like one of the things I find interesting about it is that, it's not always going to be draw your sword and roll initiative, but you're going to have these conversations. Sometimes you do have to fight your way through situations, but it doesn't mean that that it's built to be like not serious, and unserious. Like, I mean, it could obviously every table is going to play as they will. If somebody just wants to have fun with their companion spirit and do whatever, like that's their thing. But I think this is a setting that's also built for it to have those types of relationships with antagonists and have those kind of difficult choices sometimes.
Yeah. I don't know if this is this.
Have we come to the?
Feels
what
like
does the puck of time?
The puck of time says we have 15 minutes, but not every episode has to be an hour.
Yeah.
Well, I guess. Do you have a favorite villain, just in general?
In
anything.
In anything? Oh man. There is a villain. It's in I think it's the very first Dirty Harry. Clint Eastwood, for anybody who doesn't know, a long time ago in the 80s, Clint Eastwood played this like almost vigilante level police officer called Dirty Harry, and he just was a complete maniac and solved everything by violence. But he had this horrible villain. And the thing I loved about the villain is that when things were going well for the villain, he gloated. He just gloated, and he was like, I'm the smartest, man. Screw you, Dirty Harry. You'll never catch me. But then as soon as he got in just a little bit of trouble, he became a complete coward. It was like, don't hurt me. And it was, you just wanted to, and eventually Dirty Harry, that's what Dirty Harry does. With the biggest handgun in the universe, he blows people away. And it's just so, brutally satisfying on a very primal level. But that's the kind of villain, like when I, early on when, because I was a kid when I'd see those, and I would be like, and then when I started to create like role-playing villains, when I started Dungeon Master, I would use that. My villains would be so dislikable that my players, when they finally got to kill him, because like that was back in the day when that was how you solved all the problems was you'd slash it with a sword. So I made it so satisfying. You finally caught that jerk, and he was such a jerk, and he did all the evilest things, and he was such a gloating jerk. And then when you got him, he would be a complete coward and beg for his life. And, everybody would just be like, screw that. And then hit him, and that was it. So he was like one of my favorite. Now, not very nuanced or anything, but yeah. So what was your favorite, Jeremiah?
I don't know. I have a favorite villain that I made, which I really like.
That's great.
Which was started off as like an ally and companion and an NPC that assisted, and then eventually moved into kind of like a split from the party where he did something devious and he double crossed them. But he had such a good, they loved this character so much, and he had such a good rapport and back and forth with them. And so all throughout the campaign, I would abuse that relationship where I'd reintroduce the character, and they'd hate him and they'd be so angry, but they liked him just enough where they wouldn't kill him. And he'd get on their side again, and then he would pull the rug out and he'd twist the knife even deeper, or he'd do something. And it even got to the point where he ended up killing an NPC on accident. It wasn't on purpose. He wasn't that nefarious, but he ended up killing an NPC, and he was able to talk his way. Like, I thought they were going to kill him. He was able to talk his way out one last time. And I was like, and from there, I kind of had him walk off into the sunset. That was the last thing. Like, they kind of threatened him. They're like, if you ever come back, you'll be gone. Like, we will kill you. And he walked off, and the campaign ended, but I always thought about bringing that character back. Like, would they do it? Can I bring him back one last time? How would they react? And they had hated him, but they loved him at the same time. And so that was, I think, the best I had ever done in a villain.
Oh, wow.
Someone
That's
that
great.
started off, from levels 1 to 4, being a lovable sidekick character, turn into kind of this low rat, kind of backstabbing type character.
Because the shows change over time.
Yeah.
Right? It's another marker of that. I think that's fantastic.
That's cool. So what was yours, Ari?
Yeah.
The first one that came to my head, actually there were two, was Hans Gruber.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Die Hard fans. And then another Hans Landa from Inglourious Bastards.
Oh.
Those are probably two of my favorites.
Wow.
And then, right there is the alien queen from Aliens. So
Oh, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Well, she's, I mean, from a certain point of view, she's very
just a mama.
understandable.
Yeah.
She's just a mom.
Yep.
A single mom who works
She's
too hard.
trying to do-
Let's cut Reba McEntire in, please. That's so funny. Yeah, just a sad story.
Oh, yeah.
And to think later those predators came and attacked her in Iceland or wherever they were, Antarctica.
Just to put her head on a wall.
That's messed up.
She had babies.
She had a lot.
She had tons of babies.
They were all terrible.
They were
xenomorphs.
They were all so cute.
And they just need a spaceship to go to another place so they could feed. Because, you know, like if there wasn't anybody else, like what do the xenomorphs do? They just sit there.
They just hang out,
They just
play
look at each other,
cards.
go,
Just sit there.
Sure wish we had faces to hug. You know.
That's so sad.
I know. But thankfully there was Space Marines that came down and they were like, hey, well, what's this? You know?
Let's retell that story, but from the side of the xenomorphs.
Yeah.
Like a starving civilization.
Yeah.
And they're like, if only something would come and feed us.
They're like, well, we know what to do. Let's create a false signal. Like maybe a corporation will think we're valuable.
Corporation.
They're like, sure, xenomorph.
The pitch meeting on the xenomorphs
Yeah.
when they're sitting in the back and one guy's like, what if we made a false signal to a corporation?
Appeal to their wallet.
Appeal to their wallet. We're valuable.
We're valuable.
Our blood's acid. Come on. What more do you want? We can kill stuff.
That's so
Imagine
funny.
an army of us. They're like, tell us more.
This last 10 minutes is just going to be about xenomorphs.
Xenomorphs.
I just wanted to talk about movies.
We'll do the movie podcast afterwards. No, I mean, that would be that's an interesting episode where you talk about movies and you say, what do you rip from movies and put it in your game all day long.
Oh my gosh.
All day long. The movie podcast episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of good stuff you can take.
Yep.
Really, really good stuff.
Oh man. I'm sure I've got a ton of examples in my brain of this like total lifts that I did. In fact, I was thinking of one last night. What was I watching? It'll take me too long to remember it, but it was something where I was like, I could just build a whole adventure just around that moment.
I feel like I do that all the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Where I'm watching a show
Yep.
and then I pause it for a brief second and was like, if I had time, this is a campaign.
Yeah.
I just don't have time.
I want to see people's favorite antagonists in comments.
Oh, look at Ari engaging with the community. You are
first and last.
absolutely. Yeah. What's the best villain? What is the best villain from movie that you translated into a D&D game or that you want to translate into a D&D
that's
game?
good.
Because there are plenty. I have stolen a ton from popular. Actually, I think Matt Colville also said this too, to quote him again. But the more obscure you steal from, the better DM you are. So the weirder things you can
Deep
take,
cuts.
the deep cuts are what make you. Oh, this is great. Thanks. Oh, you like Tatooine? I made it myself. Yeah, desert planet, water vapor, or whatever. Anyways, that being said, thank you so much for joining us on the Obojima podcast. This was a little rambly villains, but I think we were much more succinct in the actual. Ari did an amazing job writing this section, and I think it's really helpful and super, super useful and does a good job of sculpting the world and the characters in it. So thank you so much for joining us. You can catch us on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon Music, a bunch of other stuff, and Discord and Instagram and other places. Leave comments all over the place and maybe make some suggestions on some cool podcast episodes you might want to hear or just videos you'd want to see outside of this. So cool. Goodbye, everyone. Oh, wait, this is Ari and Adam, and I'm Jeremiah. I don't know if I said that. Goodbye, everyone.